So would you mind to comment on how maybe, and I don't know, probably it's fair for us to reflect more on our Lutheran tradition, we may have had too reductionist view on purity of doctrine, at the neglect of beauty,
I think
joy,
so.
comfort, or just on truthfulness on scriptures. What do you think?
It's probably one of the dangers coming out of the Enlightenment, is that it was all very rationalistic, and so we're fighting rationalism with rationalism. But I mean, it can't be good and beautiful without being true. So that's the foundational thing, and truth is important. But the thing that is true is also the best thing and the most beautiful thing, and because it's all in Christ. And so those transcendentals, those three, the good, the true, and the beautiful, they find their fulfillment in Christ, and Christ for us. I realized, I'll tell you a story. When I was on vicarage, so this is like a pastoral internship, third-year seminary, I was in Texas, and serving a congregation pastor who's in heaven now waiting for us, and is just a beautiful man. But I'd write my sermons, and he would just mark them up like crazy. Here's the things I need to fix, and
it's very encouraging, right?
Well, I don't know. I was not encouraged. I was so frustrated. And so I went, I remember I went one day into his office, and I said, "Is there anything wrong with the sermon? In other words, is there any false doctrine?" That's what I thought. The only thing he needs to be looking at is truth.
Yes.
And he says, no, Vicar, your sermons are true, but they're not very practical. I said, oh boy, practical sermons. That means, and I thought practical, that meant law. Practical meant pietism. Practical meant instructions, legalism. I didn't want I wanted my sermons to preach the gospel. I didn't want them to be practical. So I went back to my office, and I started writing a newsletter article that was this: the gospel isn't practical. And I went to prove my point. I went to the Book of Concord, and that's our Lutheran Confessions. I opened it up, and I figured I would find there on page 5 Philip Melanchthon talking about how the law is practical, but the gospel's not. Of course, the only time I found the word practical there is in, it must be Apology of the Augsburg Confession, Article 24, on the Mass, and it says, "Clear and practical sermons hold an audience." And I thought, oh no.
He was right.
Well, I said, oh, Melanchthon didn't even understand law and gospel.
Okay.
But I had to go back, and I had to say, how is the gospel practical? That's a great question. And so I started reading our Book of Concord to ask this question: how is the gospel practical? And I saw over and over that word that we mentioned already, the word comfort. Over and over it comes up. This doctrine truly comforts terrified doctrine. This doctrine comforts terrified souls. This doctrine brings comfort to the people who need it. Over and over, it comforts. And I realized how central that is to our Lutheran confession. I did a comparison. I searched the Council of Trent for the word comfort, and I found that it only shows up a few times. And it's like this: the Pope can be comforted in inventing doctrine because of this and that. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. And then I pulled up the Westminster Standards, so the Reformed confessions. I did the same. I searched for comfort. And it comes up in a few times in the Bible passages quoted, but never in their own words. And I realized how this idea of comfort is central to our Lutheran theology. And it's unlike any other theology. And it's because our theology is very practical in this way, is that it brings the gospel to bear. Here we are, sinners who deserve God's wrath. And instead of getting his wrath, we get the kindness of God in Christ through his death and resurrection. It's an incredible comfort. It's an incredible gift. It's an amazing thing. And our Lutheran theology hones in on that like no other theology in all the world. And it truly comforts the terrified.